Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cut Rate Commander, the series in which we take a look at low-price commanders and make budget decks with them. My name is Grazit, and today we'll be looking at the resident Witherbloom Tea Connoisseur, Dina Soulsteeper. Before we continue, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this type of content and would like me to continue making more videos like this in the future. Additionally, I would like to thank everyone for reaching the 100 sub milestone. I could not have done this without all of your support. As a small token of appreciation, I'll be running a small giveaway for an Ultra Pro Satin Tower deck box, which you can find on how to enter at the end of the video. Also, be sure to stick around until the end to see what 3 commanders you can vote for in the comments for an upcoming episode. So with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. Dina Soulsteeper is a 1/3 Dryad Druid that costs 1 black and 1 green with the following effects. Whenever we gain life, each opponent loses 1 life, and we can pay 1 and sack a creature to give Dina +X+0 until end of turn, where X is equal to the sacked creature's power. CMC 2 for a 1/3 is a very fair rate for our commander, and her abilities lend themselves nicely to multiple types of builds. Looking at Dina's first ability, it's reminiscent of already existing cards such as Marauding Blight Priest and Epicure of Blood, allowing us to convert our life gain into life drain for our opponents. The difference here being that Dina grants us access to green, which not only grants us access to the best ramp choices in the game, but a multitude of other ways to gain life, such as through lands and creatures entering play, coupled with tried and true life gain, life drain strategies that commanders such as Veto have enjoyed. So much like the tea she partakes of, Dina doesn't have to choose between black or green when she can have the best of both worlds. Dina's second ability, at first glance, seems to be non-synergistic with the first, allowing her to sack creatures to power herself up, which to be fair can be used to great effect when sacking big creatures that normally would be unable to swing on their own. Still, this ability has its place in the life gain plan, giving us a cheap sack outlet to send our own creatures to the grave and trigger any death effects those creatures may have or any death triggers of spells that are already on the field. With that in mind, this particular build will be focusing on Dina's primary static ability, giving us a large number of small life gain effects that will trigger Dina and cards with similar effects over and over again, draining the table as we keep our life total nice and padded. This means we'll be taking advantage of effects that will gain us life as our and our opponent's creatures enter and leave play, as well as when we play our lands or even cast our spells, making sure Dina triggers as often as possible to suck the life right out of our opponents. Maybe Dina was onto something with the health benefits of tea drinking. It's just too bad our opponents won't be appreciating it as much as we will. So now that we know a bit about the commander and the deck's playstyle, let's start breaking down the deck itself by starting with the creatures. The CMC 1 slot starts us off with some life gain with Essence Warden, Death Greeter, and Jadi Offshoot. Essence Warden and Death Greeter are effectively inverse copies of each other, both being 1/1s, with the former gaining us 1 life every time any creature enters play, while the latter does so when any creature dies, making them both excellent sources of life gain as they trigger on both our and our opponent's creatures. Jadi Offshoot is a 0/3 defender with a landfall trigger that gains us 1 life every time we play a land, for some appreciated life gain as we make our land drops for turn on a decent sized blocker. More life gain comes up next with Thrall Parasite and Valentine, Dean of the Vein. Thrall Parasite is a 1/1 with Extort, allowing us to play a black whenever we cast a spell to have our opponents lose 1 life while we gain life equal to the amount that they lost, in addition to allowing us to tap it and pay 2 life to remove a counter from a target non-land permanent, giving us a repeatable drain effect on a low-cost body with some counter hate stapled on for added utility. Valentine is a modal DFC, the front face being a 1/1 with lifelink and menace that exiles our opponent's creatures as they die while giving us the option to pay 2 when they do so, creating a 1/1 pest if we do, which heals us for 1 when it dies. His back face is Lazette, Dean of the Root, a 4/4 for 4 that, whenever we gain life, we can pay 1 to put a +1/+1 counter on all our creatures and grant them trample until end of turn. While Lazette is nice to have for a more go-wide strategy, Valentine is the main reason we're playing this card, as he provides good graveyard hate and pest production for us, as well as having lifelink himself. Finally, at the end of this slot, we have Elvish Mystic and Llanowar Elves, both 1/1s that tap for a green for some much appreciated early game ramp to fuel our bigger spells. Moving into the CMC 2 slot, we have some life drain effects with Basilica Screecher, Blood Artist, and Zulaport Cutthroat. Basilica Screecher is a 1/2 flyer with Extort, again providing us with some cheap and recurrable source of life drain as we cast our spells. Blood Artist is a 0/1 that drains an opponent for 1 and heals us for 1 whenever it or another creature dies, giving us a very efficient means of life drain as both our and our opponent's creatures die off. Zulaport Cutthroat is similar, being a 1/1 that drains all our opponents for 1 and healing us for 1 when any of our creatures die, this time only triggering off our own creatures but hurting all our opponents to compensate. More life gain follows suit with Scavenging Ooze and Witherbloom Apprentice. Scavenging Ooze is a 2/2 that we can pay a green to exile a card from a graveyard, putting a +1/+1 counter on it and gaining us 2 life if the exiled card was a creature, making it a means of hosing graveyard-focused decks while getting bigger and gaining us life in the process. Witherbloom Apprentice is a 2/2 with Magecraft, draining all our opponents for 1 and healing us for 1 whenever we cast or copy an instant or sorcery, giving us some extra mileage out of our ramp, card draw, and removal sources as we play them. Finally, we end this slot with Kazandu Nectarpot, Sakura Tribelder, and Reassembling Skeleton. Kazandu Nectarpot is a 1/3 with Landfall that gains us 1 life whenever we play a land, making it a bigger copy of Jadi Offshoot that we run for the same reasons. Sakura Tribelder is a 1/1 that we can sack to put a basic land from our deck into play tapped, making it an efficient form of ramp that can activate our death triggers when it sacks itself. Reassembling Skeleton is a 1/1 that we can play 1 in a black to put back on the field from the grave tapped, granting us a recurable creature to either sack or use as a blocker. Moving into the CMC 3 slot, we start off with some black creatures with Ayara, First of Lochthwain, Sedgemoor Witch, and Marauding Blight Priest. Ayara is a 2/3 that drains the table for 1 and heals us for 1 whenever it or another one of our black creatures ETBs, as well as being able to be tapped to sack a creature and draw a card, providing us with more drain and a sack outlet to trigger death effects. Sedgemoor Witch is a 3/2 with Menace, Ward, pay 3 life, and Magecraft that creates a pest whenever we cast or copy an instant or sorcery, for another means of getting pests on the board on an evasive and protected body. Marauding Blight Priest simply has our opponents lose 1 life whenever we gain life, giving us an identical ability as our commander to double up on. Up next are Courser of Krufix, Silver Smote Ghoul, and Murderous Rider. Courser of Krufix is a 2/4 that has us play with the top card of our deck revealed, lets us play lands from the top of our deck, and gains us 1 life whenever we put a land into play, providing us with some good ramp and life gain as we make our land drops per turn. Silver Smote Ghoul is a 3/1 that we can sack for 1 in a black to draw a card, as well as put back into play tapped on our end step if we have gained 3 or more life that turn, making it a recurable creature that can sack itself for card advantage we can easily meet the requirements for. Murderous Rider is a 2/3 lifelinker that goes to the bottom of the deck when it dies and can be played for its adventure side for 1 and 2 black to destroy a creature or a planeswalker at instant speed at the cost of 2 life, giving us some nice removal and leaving behind a source of life gain as a bonus. Last in this slot we have Burnished Heart, a 2/2 we can pay 3 and sack to get 2 basic lands from our deck into play tapped, giving us another self-sacked source of ramp for those extra death triggers. The CMC 4 slot is all vampires with Falconwrath Noble, Vindictive Vampire, and Sangromancer. Falconwrath Noble is a 2/2 flyer that drains an opponent for 1 and heals us for 1 when it or another creature dies, making it a bigger and evasive Blood Artist which we run for the same reason. In a similar vein, Vindictive Vampire is a bigger Zulaport Cutthroat, being a 2/3 that drains all our opponents for 1 and heals us for 1 whenever one of our creatures dies, which again we run for the same AoE drain as its little brother provides. Sangromancer is a 3/3 flyer that gains us 3 life whenever an opponent's creature dies or whenever an opponent discards a card, serving as another source of life gain as our opponent's creatures die or when occasionally cards are pitched. The CMC 5 slot has 2 members with Epicure of Blood and Tivash Gloom Summoner. Epicure of Blood is a 4/4 that deals 1 damage to all of our opponents whenever we gain life for another copy of our commander's ability on a reasonably sized body. Tivash is another 4/4, this time with lifelink, who at the beginning of our end step gives us the option to pay X life, X being the amount of life we gain that turn, to create an XX flying demon, giving us a powerful life gain payoff by creating huge evasive bodies to swing in with. Finally, in the CMC 6 slot, we have our last creature with Pontiff of Blight, a 2/7 with Extort that grants all our other creatures Extort as well, giving us some huge life gain and drain potential if our board is wide enough. Now with all the creatures covered, let's move on to our instants. Starting in the CMC 1 slot, we have Village Rites and Erebos' Intervention. Village Rites lets us sack a creature to draw 2 cards, giving us card advantage as well as proccing any death triggers. Erebos' Intervention is an X spell that has either target creature lose -X until end of turn, gaining us the same amount of life, or exiling twice X cards from any graveyard, giving us some instant speed scalable removal with life gain or graveyard hate if needed. The CMC 2 slot gives us some removal options with Cast Down, Malicious Affliction, and Golgari Charm. Cast Down simply destroys target non-legendary creature, giving us a cheap removal option to deal with non-commanders. Malicious Affliction destroys target non-black creature or 2 creatures if a creature had died this turn, for some cheap 2-for-1 creature removal. Golgari Charm either gives all creatures -1/-1, destroys target enchantment, or regenerates all of our creatures, giving us a decent amount of utility in a single card. The latter half of this slot gives us Tend the Pests and Plumb the Forbidden. Tend the Pests has a sack a creature and create X 1/1 pests, X being equal to the sacked creature's power, giving us some life gain in the form of tokens as well as trigger and any additional death triggers. Plumb the Forbidden has us draw a card and pay a life, allowing us to sack any number of creatures to copy this spell by that amount, giving us a means of sacking most if not all our board for card advantage when needed. Removal is up next in the CMC 3 slot with Beast Within, Natural End, and Putrefy. Beast Within destroys target permanent at the cost of giving its controller a 3/3 token, making it a very flexible removal spell in our colors. Natural End destroys target enchantment or artifact and gains us 3 life, giving us some life gain tacked on to some passable removal. Putrefy allows us to destroy target artifact or creature, not allowing it to be regenerated, giving us another flexible removal spell with occasional upside against regenerators. Lastly, in the CMC4 slot, we have Mortality Spear, which destroys target non-land permanent and costs 2 less if we gain life this turn, for some more potent permanent removal that we will usually be casting for reduced cost. So now that we've covered all the instants, let's move on to our sorceries. The CMC1 slot only has a single member with Pest Infestation, a double X spell that destroys X target artifacts or enchantments and gives us double X pest tokens, for some decent removal and production of pests, depending on how much mana we're willing to pump into it. Moving into the CMC2 slot, we have Rampant Growth, Farseek, and Sign in Blood. Rampant Growth and Farseek both grab a land from our deck and put it into play tapped, with the former doing so for a basic, and the latter grabbing any swamp for some no-nonsense land ramping. Sign in Blood has target player draw 2 cards and lose 2 life, giving us an efficient draw spell and occasional burn to close out games. The draw and ramp continue into the CMC3 slot with Cultivate, Kodama's Reach, and Read the Bones. Cultivate and Kodama's Reach are effectively the same card, both grabbing 2 basics from our deck, putting one into play tapped and the other one into our hand for a no-frills land ramp card. Read the Bones has a Scry 2, Draw 2, and Lose 2 life for more efficient card selection and card draw in our colors. Last in the slot, we have Gaze of Granite, an X spell that has us destroy all non-land permanents with CMC X or less, making it a decent board clear for low to mid-cost permanents depending on how much mana we put into it. The CMC4 slot has 2 members with Harmonize and Essence Pulse. Harmonize simply has us draw 3 cards for some additional no-nonsense card advantage. Essence Pulse has us gain 2 life, then each other creature loses -X/-X, X being equal to the life we gain this turn, making it an AoE -2/-2 at worst, but usually being much higher considering our deck's game plan. Skipping to the CMC6 slot, we have Deadly Tempest, which destroys all creatures and has each player lose life equal to the amount of creatures they control to destroy it this way, tacking on some extra burn to a board wipe for that extra reach. Finally, in the CMC8 slot, we have Find Finality, a split card whose Find side can be cast for 2 Golgari to return up to 2 creatures from our grave to our hand for some recursion, or for its Finality side for 4 and 2 Golgari to put 2 +1/+1 counters on a creature, then reduce all creatures by -4/-4 until the end of turn for a board wipe when needed. Both modes are good for us, either allowing us to recur our creatures or to board wipe while just barely keeping our commander alive through it. That covers all our sorceries, so let's move on to our enchantments. The CMC1 slot starts us off with Vampiric Rites, which lets us pay 1 and a black to sack a creature, draw a card, and gain 1 life, giving us a recurable source of card draw and life gain on a 1-drop enchantment. The CMC2 slot gives us Sanctum of Stone Fangs, which drains all our opponents for 1 and heals us for 1 at the beginning of our first main phase, giving us a cheap source of drain we can drop early then leave alone for value from our payoffs. The CMC3 slot then brings us Bastion of Remembrance, Retreat to Hagara, and Blight Mound. Bastion of Remembrance drains our opponents for 1 and heals us for 1 when any of our creatures die, as well as giving us a 1/1 soldier when it ETBs, for another Zulaport Cutthroat-like effect on an enchantment, which is much harder for our opponents to deal with. Retreat to Hagara has a landfall effect that lets us either pump a creature by +1/+0 and grant it Death Touch until end of turn, or to drain our opponents by 1 and heals us for 1, which we'll be mainly playing for the AoE drain. Blight Mound gives all our attacking pests +1/+0 and Menace, while creating a pest token whenever a non-token creature dies, giving us some extra value out of our creatures when they get sacked or removed, and pumping our pests as a bonus. Last in this slot is Trudge Garden, which lets us pay 2 whenever we gain a life to create a 4/4 token with Trample, generating us some more sack fodder or beaters as we gain life. Reaching the CMC5 slot, we've come to our last 2 enchantments with Sanguine Bond and Moldervine Reclamation. Sanguine Bond deals damage to target opponent equal to the life we gain, supercharging our drain plan once it hits the field significantly. Moldervine Reclamation has us draw a card and gain a life whenever one of our creatures dies for some nice additional value as our creatures hit the graveyard. That's it for our enchantments, so let's move on to our artifacts. Skipping right to the CMC3 slot, we have Pestilence Cauldron and Pristine Talisman. Pestilence Cauldron is a modal DFC whose front side we can tap and discard a card to create a 1/1 pest. We can pay 1 in tap to mill everyone equal to the amount of life we gain that turn, or pay 4 in tap and exile 4 cards from a graveyard to draw 1 card, giving us a decent suite of effects that synergize well with our game plan. Its back face is Restorative Burst, a sorcery that costs 3 and 2 green, and has us return up to 2 target creatures, lands, or planeswalkers back to hand, then healing everyone for 4 and exiling itself, giving us some recursion and life gain should we need it. Pristine Talisman simply taps for 1 and gains us a life whenever we do this, giving us some recurable life gain on a rock, which is appreciated. The CMC4 slot brings us to our last artifact with Well of Lost Dreams, which, whenever we gain life, lets us pay X being equal to or less than the amount of life we gained to draw that many cards, turning our life gain into card advantage, which is perfect for us. That's all our artifacts covered, so let's look at our planeswalkers. Only one planeswalker joins us in the CMC4 slot, that being Vraska Golgari Queen, who comes into play with 4 loyalty. Her +2 lets us sack a permanent to draw a card and gain a life, which is a decent sack outlet. Her -3 lets us destroy a target non-land permanent of CMC 3 or less for some decent spot removal. And her -9 gives us an emblem which says if any of our creatures deal combat damage to a player, they lose the game, which will rarely ever happen, but is still a decent win condition. That pretty much covers our planeswalker, so let's move on to our land base. Quickly running down our mana lands, we have Command Tower, which taps for any color in our commander's color identity. Llanowar Wastes, which taps for a colorless or either of our colors if we take a damage. Tainted Wood, which taps for a colorless or either of our colors if we control a swamp. Necroblossom Snarl, which comes into play tapped unless we reveal a forest or swamp from hand, and taps for either of our colors. Temple of Malady, which comes into play tapped, scries 1 with ETBs, and taps for either of our colors. Witherbloom Campus, which comes into play tapped, taps for either of our colors, and we can pay 4 and tap to scry 1. Golgari Rot Farm, which comes into play tapped, bounces one of our lands back to hand, and taps for both of our colors. Blighted Woodland, which taps for a colorless, and we can tap, pay 3, a green, and sack to bring 2 basics into play from our deck tapped. Myriad Landscape, which taps for a colorless, comes into play tapped, and we can pay 2 and sack to put 2 of the same basic land from our deck into play tapped. And finally, Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse, both of which we can tap and sack to put a basic land into play from our deck onto the field tapped. For utility lands, we start off with High Market, Grim Backwoods, and Sapseep Forest. High Market taps for a colorless, or we can tap it and sack a creature to gain a life, giving us a sack outlet on a land that furthers our life gain plan. Grim Backwoods also taps for a colorless, or we can pay 2, a black, a green, and tap it to sack a creature and draw a card, giving us another sack outlet for card advantage this time in our land base. Seasap Forest comes into play tapped, taps for a green, and we can pay a green and tap it to gain a life if we control 2 or more green permanents, giving us an extra bit of repeatable life gain in the land slot. Finally, we get to our last 2 utility lands with Bojuka Bog and Ghost Quarter. Bojuka Bog comes into play tapped, taps for a black, and exiles target opponent's graveyard for some potent graveyard hate in our land slot. Ghost Quarter taps for a colorless, and we can tap it and sack it to destroy target land, giving its controller a basic from their deck to replace it, making it a good source of spot removal for our opponent's utility lands. Lastly, we're running 10 forests and 10 swamps as our basics to fill out our land base. So now that we've taken a look at all the cards in the deck, let's take a look at the deck's breakdown. This deck currently has 29 creatures including the commander, 11 instants, 12 sorceries, 8 enchantments, 3 artifacts, 1 planeswalker, and 36 lands. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 31 sources of life gain, 11 cards that care about life gain, 11 cards that drain life, 10 sack outlets, 8 cards that create tokens, and 2 cards that can self-reanimate, giving us a large amount of life gain sources to trigger our commander, along with the means to drain life from our opponents and take advantage of said life gain, coupled with a fair means of ways to generate death triggers with tokens and self-reanimating creatures. For the general deck stats, we have 12 ramp sources, 13 card draw sources, 12 targeted removal sources, and 4 board wipes, giving us a fairly standard array of ramp, draw, and removal with no real outliers. Looking at our mana curve, we have 11 1-drops, 18 2-drops, 20 3-drops, 8 4-drops, 4 5-drops, 2 6-drops, 0 7-drops, and 1 8-drop, giving us an aggressive curve to allow us to cast as many life gain effects as possible to set up our commander and payoffs in the mid and late game. Currently, this deck is valued at $63.13, not counting the price of basic lands or shipping. This price was calculated by using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. For some side grades, some more life gain payoffs would be good, such as Honor Troll for more life gain and a big body. Blood Researcher and Bloody Aerialist would be good as well for the evasive bodies that keep getting bigger as we gain more life. Vanewitch Coven would also be a good addition here if we want to focus on recurring our creatures as we gain life. More drain effects such as Trespasser's Curse, Revenge of the Ravens, and Bantu's Monument would also be good additions to keep picking away at our opponent's life totals while keeping ours nice and padded. For upgrades, Veto, Thorn of the Dusk Rose would be a great addition that was just dropped out of this build due to price, but I would still highly recommend for the Sanguine Bond effect he provides. Life Gift would also be a good include in this deck to gain life off of lands, which includes our opponents as well as ours. Boldus' Citadel, Aetherflux Reservoir, and Belladros Witherbloom are also nice additions, giving us a means to weaponize our life gain further through their various means. At the highest tiers, we can add Exquisite Blood for the instant win, Polluted Bonds for the powerful life gain effect, and the Great Henge for the card draw and life gain it provides. And if you're in desperate need for another sack outlet, remember that Diamond Valley is always an option if you want to get a piece of cardboard instead of a PS5. Thanks everyone for sticking around to the end of the video. Firstly, I would like to thank all of my subscribers for helping this channel reach the 100 sub milestone. I could have not done this on my own, and I sincerely appreciate your enjoyment of my work and hope to continue to provide you with content that you all enjoy. As a thank you, I'll be running a small giveaway on KingSumo.com, the winner of which will be receiving a Ultra Pro Satin Tower deck box. The link to the giveaway will be in the description, and additional entries can be obtained if you subscribe or are subscribed to the channel. Best of luck to all of you. As per the votes in the comments, the next Cut Rate Commander episode will be featuring Cody, Vociferious Codex, as voted by Pablo Castillo, Jerry Husso, Link Maxwell, and Alan Gustafsson. That means the new voting lineup will be Killian Ink Duelist, Quintorius Field Historian, and Zamone Quandrix Prodigy. Let me know in the comments below on which of these three you'd like to see an upcoming video on. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.